All right, before we get on to the best Star Wars movie ever created, that's right, I said it, the best one ever created. We're going to talk about the saltynerdclub.com. If you guys like what you hear, if you want to support this podcast, you can go to saltynerdclub.com. That takes you directly to our Patreon account. You can give us $1, you can give us $5, you can give us whatever you feel like you can give us to support and help grow this podcast and all this cool content we have. It will go towards improving our audio quality, improving our equipment that we have, or just being able to make more content for you guys to listen to. Our retirement fund.
Pizza.
Maybe a Corona-19 relief fund.
Beer money.
Beer money. That's more important. You guys can go to saltynerdclub.com and donate some cash, some cheddar to the Salty Nerd podcast. Thank you very much. Moving on now to the Empire Strikes Back. The best movie ever freaking created.
So good.
So perfect. There is nothing wrong with this movie. Even the special editions couldn't mess up this movie. It's the best movie ever created.
That's Raiders of the Lost Ark. This is number 2, okay?
Oh, y'all gonna fight?
I'm going to say it.
Take your shirts off.
I'm going to say this. I'm going to say it's a tie. I'll give you that. And Raiders of the Lost Ark is pretty goddamn good.
Terminator 2.
No.
Get out of here with that shit.
Nothing with Arnold Schwarzenegger counts.
Get to the chopper.
I'll be back.
Anyway.
That line was not in Terminator 2.
It wasn't?
Oh.
It was in the original cut.
Empire Strikes Back. This is my personal favorite movie that is in the Star Wars universe.
Hands down.
Hands down. It's so perfect. I can't think of anything I don't love about this movie. Straight off the bat, we're in the mix of things where we see the Star Destroyer throwing out the little probe droids trying to find the Rebel Alliance. We have Vader basically on just like this
quest.
I wouldn't say
obsession.
It's like a blood feud, like obsession with trying to find out who destroyed the Death Star, who bested him in
getting those dirty rebels.
I love it. I just love it so much. Kadish, you're better at doing this than I am. Set the table for Empire Strikes Back for me.
So it's the middle movie of this episode 4 through 6 trilogy, and arguably the best Star Wars film ever made. In fact, this is kind of the movie that I like to call the linchpin of this entire franchise, because without this movie, Star Wars would have been dead in 2015 probably or something, or at least 2018. But basically, this is the middle act of a much larger story, and this is where the good guys lose. And that alone just makes this movie so much more poignant. You get this romance between Han and Leia, and that kind of grounds the movie in a way that is very human and emotional. You've got Luke continuing along his journey and learning the ways of the Force, but failing, and not only failing but almost dying through his failure. And everyone in this movie really has an arc. It's even the Millennium Falcon has an arc in this movie, where the Millennium Falcon isn't working right. Its hyperdrive has been broken the entire movie, and then finally at the end of the movie, the hyperdrive gets fixed, and that's the ship's arc throughout the whole film is trying to get its hyperdrive fixed. But we also get introduced to a lot of new characters like Lando, and we get introduced to a lot of different aspects of the Star Wars universe, like asteroid fields and bounty hunters and all this other stuff. And it does everything a good sequel should do. It fleshes out the universe, expands the lore, it deepens our understanding of the characters. I mean, it's kind of funny because if you look at what they did with Infinity War with the Avengers, where they kind of made that movie, the main character is Thanos, and you get to kind of get to know the villain of the story. That's what they did in Empire, which was arguably like Darth Vader is the main character of the movie, and he's the one who we get more of a sense of in Empire Strikes Back. And the thing that struck me the most on my rewatch of this was how masterfully this film made the Empire such a threat. Because at the end of the first movie, the Empire is kind of like this behemoth, and it's very formidable, but they get dealt a huge defeating blow at the end of the first movie. And then in this movie, the very opening of the film, the first act, reestablishes the threat that the Empire poses. And the thing I love about how the bad guys are handled in this movie is the good guys are only as good as the guys that they're going up against. And the Empire in this movie, and in particular Darth Vader, is just such a good antagonist, such a good threat. Because if you look at how they operate throughout the course of the movie, Vader is just so on top of things. Like he is just, every move that the good guys makes, he's already 2 steps ahead of them, and he checkmates them constantly. He lures Luke into a trap. He's able to, get the drop on Han Solo and Leia and stuff. And the opening scene of this movie, one of my biggest criticisms of The Last Jedi is that
you should not speak the name of that movie while talking about The Empire Strikes Back. New rule.
I kind of have to here because the military strategy in The Last Jedi makes no sense whatsoever. But if you look at the Battle of Hoth, there are 2 scenes like leading up to the Battle of Hoth where basically Vader kind of explains what the error was that the Admiral made in coming out of Lightspeed too early. And then it's very clearly stated that, okay, we have to do a ground assault to knock out the shield so that the ships can come in and wipe out the rebel base. Because as long as the shields are up, they can't do anything.
An orbital shot.
So Vader's like, okay, land your troops outside the radius of the shield and advance. And then it cuts to Leia in the rebel base, and she's telling everyone what the strategy is to get the transports off the planet safely and where to rendezvous and stuff like that. And it's just 2 very quick scenes, but it sets up the logic of what the battle's supposed to be, and it does it expertly.
Yeah.
And it makes perfect sense. And nothing in that battle like makes you stop and go like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't take you out of the movie. Right. Whereas something like with The Last Jedi, you're like...
It's the exact same setup for the same exact battle because he wanted to do a callback to Empire, but there's no reason for them to do that.
Yeah, it's like why didn't you fire on the transports before you fired on the planet? Because the planet's not going anywhere. Like why?
Well, not even that, but on Crate too, because they had the walkers and they walked from like 5 miles away. Like, why'd you do that? They could have just landed right in front of them. So anyway, I don't want to talk about The Last Jedi. I freaking hate that movie. Anyway, so how good is The Empire Strikes Back?
Empire Strikes Back is really good. And the reason it's so good is because the bad guys are really at the top of their game in this movie.
Yeah.
And the obstacles that they present to the heroes are so big and the stakes are so high that you just get invested in what's happening. Like even like if you look at the end, Vader specifically sabotaged the Millennium Falcon's hyperdrive just on the off chance that they should escape because he knew that there was a possibility because these guys have been resourceful in the past. And his plan was capture Luke, bring Leia and Chewbacca back to his ship and, send Han off with the bounty hunter who they never refer to Boba Fett by his name, by the way, in the movie. It's always bounty hunter. And, normally, like the bad guys wouldn't be expecting these guys to escape, and so they'd just leave the Millennium Falcon on its own. But Vader was like, "Well, just on the off chance,
just in case,
I'm going to make sure that I have this one ace up my sleeve."
Basically, I'm not going to let what happened last time happen again.
But it just shows like how formidable Vader is as an antagonist.
Yeah, and I think that's I when you're talking about it like that, what comes to my mind is the backstory of him being in the Clone Wars as Anakin in the cartoon and like learning all these strategies and working with the clone troopers and growing as like a military what is the word? Strategist. And I just, now that you're like bringing those things together, I'm like, oh man, that's a cool little like, yeah, he learned all that from the Clone Wars.
Yeah, but like even like when Han is going into the asteroid field to escape.
Oh yeah, asteroids do not concern me.
And Vader's like, follow them into the asteroid field, and all of his subordinates are like, but sir, like we'll get pummeled to bits. He's like, I don't care, go after them. And like no other commander would have followed him into that situation, but Vader was just like, no, go for it.
Asteroids do not concern me, Admiral. I want that ship, not excuses. God, I love this freaking movie. Jude, tell me how much you love The Empire Strikes Back.
This is not my favorite.
What? Get off my podcast.
That's enough out of her.
Good Lord.
You're cut off.
Tell me you found it boring.
I didn't. No.
Okay.
No. It's just not my favorite. In fact, it's my least favorite of the
Really?
3. Yeah. It's just not as memorable for me.
me just
I'll pack my shit up and go.
let me just drink my beer in sorrow.
I still like it. It's just it's not as enthralling as I find New Hope or
She's a
Empire
Return
Strikes Back.
of the Jedi gal.
Okay, I get it. It's two different, very, very different tones.
Return.
But is there anything that you want to talk about The Empire Strikes Back that strikes you as something that you remember about it?
Old baby Yoda.
Old baby Yoda. It's not baby Yoda.
No, it's old baby Yoda.
No, it's not. Is he a clone? What is he? Tell us, Jon Favreau.
When 900 years you are, look as good as you will not.
Matt
I love
Vader-
how kooky he is.
He is.
He
He
just
is
is
kooky.
putting on this front of this just weird little alien.
Yeah.
And
That's kind
let's
of
see
Yoda's
if you
gig.
have patience.
And talk about subverting expectations. Where like when you first meet him and you're like, who's this annoying little alien? And then it's like, oh, he's the
Turns
Jedi.
out-
He's the Jedi Master. War, not to make one great. Yeah. It's cool looking back now because there's, of course, there's a freaking argument in the fandom of whether or not Yoda is playful and like joking, messes around, if he has that personality trait, or if he was just strictly a joke on Luke or to try and get him to fall. It
was a test.
It was a test.
Well, I
or
think-
if Yoda actually does have those personality traits that we see every so often
I
hinted.
think Yoda has a sense of humor for sure.
Yeah,
I think
so
he has a sense of humor, but also when you are in isolation for so long, you get a little kooky.
kind of lose it. I think
Yeah.
I live tweeted The Empire Strikes Back last week or whenever I watched it, and that was one of the things I said. Like, this dude's been on a swamp planet for like 20 years,
Yeah.
all alone. Like, yeah, he's a little, out there.
He's hanging out with Qui-Gon.
Yeah, in the spirit world.
I mean, how many of us have gotten like that in quarantine with our kids? Just like lost it one
gosh.
day and just
My
been
kids
like,
are
oh, whatever.
I got to get my kids out of the house.
There's another disconnect here, though, where Obi-Wan keeps referring to Yoda being
His old master.
And
Was I any different when you
and
taught
that was not very well established in the prequels.
No, well, okay, so there's like a little thing in episode 2 where like Yoda's basically like the kindergarten teacher. He teaches all the young ones. So technically, he was Obi-Wan's master at one point in time. But the way it comes off in context of The Empire Strikes Back, it seems like Obi-Wan was the apprentice of Yoda first and foremost.
Yeah.
And so they kind of changed. That's a little bit of a retcon there. Matt, before we get off into the weeds too much, because I love this movie, Matt, what are your thoughts on The Empire Strikes Back?
It's the best one
Yeah.
by far. Absolutely.
Do you have any favorite moments? Anything that you remember, like, just really struck you about this movie?
I remember being kind of flabbergasted in the scene when Vader walks into the Emperor's hologram chamber or whatever that is.
yeah.
Because, when I was 11, I think, when this movie came out, and here comes Darth Vader walking in, and he's kneeling down
Yeah.
to this big-headed hologram. It's like, whoa, who's this guy? And that was our first introduction to the Emperor. And it was pretty cool.
Do you remember which version of the Emperor do you remember most? Do you remember the old version or do you remember the new Ian McDermott version?
I remember Ian McDermott version
Really?
the most
Okay.
now, but that was a
that's
long
the
time
special
ago.
edition, isn't it?
And it wasn't.
Or no, that's prequel edition.
I was 11,
Yeah.
so it's not like, and we didn't go watch
That's interesting.
those movies 15 times when they came out. I think I saw the movie twice. Probably.
That's
when I was a
interesting
kid,
because
but
I grew up on the VHSs of the theatrical versions. So the version that I always lean back on, and I don't actually like the new Ian
it's
McDermott
like
villain.
I know what the original version looks like, but I still see Ian McDermott in my head when I think about it.
Yeah, he had that weird eye.
Yeah, I remember the original theatrical version where it was like, I think it was voiced by Alec Guinness. It was because they didn't get anybody else to do it, but they got Alec Guinness to do the voiceover, and then they had a woman in a mask with a hood on.
Right.
And that was the version that I got attached to in this movie. And when I saw after the prequels came out and they went back and retrofitted Ian McDermott in there, I think they changed what he actually said. The lines were different also, and I didn't like it. I was like, what the heck, man? Where's my
Palpatine.
Yeah, like I like the original theatrical version Palpatine. I think that was one of the things I didn't like about it.
Something dark side.
This movie introduced so much cool stuff to the
yeah.
lore. It's like Kate was saying, we got Boba Fett and Bosk and IG-88 and the bounty hunters and Slave One,
AT-AT.
Colonel
Star.
There was so many toys.
Which is
out
how
of
you
the show.
correctly pronounce that.
Yeah, for sure.
AT-ATs.
It's not AT-AT, it's AT-AT.
But
Superstar
the first
Destroyers.
appearance of Yoda was always cool to me. I always think of the scene when Yoda raises the X-wing out of the swamp. It's incredible. We're like, that's some deep stuff there, man. It's
John
just
Williams, can we just talk about John Williams for a minute? Like, he just knocked it out of the park with this, dude. Like, the music was incredible. And something that I learned, I love listening to the soundtrack show. And one of the things that David W. Collins kind of educated me on is the amount of interconnected material within the music itself with the original trilogy, where there's actually notes and phrases within the music of Yoda's theme that aligns with the Rebel theme. And when I listen to him break it down and kind of play those two tracks over each other, and you hear the similar wavelength that the theme music has, it was incredible to me. I'd never really thought about it before, but like watching those scenes now, I have such a bigger appreciation for John Williams and for the story itself, and showing Yoda, like showing off his Force powers. But like watching The Empire Strikes Back for me as a kid, I think the thing that struck me the most was just how the heroes that you love so much and are always rooting for are constantly on their heels. They never ever have the upper hand.
never get a break.
I'll never forget the first time I saw Darth Vader in his chamber.
Oh yes,
And the helmet's coming down, and they're over this
scarred
scarred,
bald
battle,
head,
gross head. You're like, what the hell does he look like? You know?
Yeah.
And,
That was the
it's
first time
just
we ever
like,
got a
oh
hint.
my God, what is under that mask? It's just like,
So we really didn't have a hint as to what was going on with Vader, why he was in the suit until that moment. And we're like, whoa, something's wrong with this guy. That's why he's in this outfit.
Yeah, but Vader's such a boss.
Oh my gosh, dude. He takes
I would never want to be a general underneath him.
no prisoners, man.
It is funny how he keeps killing off the incompetent subordinates, and every time he does it, you can just see like that final shot where the Millennium Falcon gets away, and everyone on the bridge is just like, "Oh, they're just waiting to see what he does," and he just turns around and leaves, and everyone's just like, "Oh, thank God."
Yeah.
I think when I originally saw this, the whole he's more machine than man thing, I think I just thought he was getting he chose that. He was getting upgrades. He decided to become more machine than man. I didn't know the story. Did you guys know the story?
No, I don't think
behind
anybody
why?
did.
Yeah.
Nobody did it.
Okay, so I didn't know that there was anything wrong with him. I never thought that there was anything that had been medically intervened. I just thought, he decided he would be more powerful as part machine.
Oh, okay. That's cool. Yeah, that's probably a good take, especially not knowing the backstory before the prequels came out. Yeah, I like that. It's a good idea. Anyway, so yeah, the thing that really draws me to this movie, and I don't know if I'm just crazy in my head or something, but the fact that the heroes that we root for are constantly on their heels at every step of the way. Like, we start out, first thing that happens is Luke gets half eaten by a wampa.
Yeah.
Right. We get to see him. His face is all bloodied up and scarred. He's hanging upside down, and we get to see
the reason for that?
because Mark Hamill got in a motorcycle accident and messed up his face.
Yep.
So they had to come up with a reason why his plastic surgery looked a little different.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that.
Everybody knows that trivia.
Come on, man.
That's like that Twitter account that asks, did you know that Harrison Ford played Han Solo?
Kate is over here trying to get all.
Did you know?
Did you know this? Did you know this?
I
Come on,
learned
dude.
it when I lived in Hollywood. And I think that this is the reason why there are clauses in people's contracts now, why you can't
Oh, yeah.
go skydiving if you're about to shoot a movie.
Oh, man. Anyway, so yeah, I love not the anticipation, that's not the right word to say, but just the struggle of watching our heroes. He's the
All
writer.
thoughts, all good thoughts come from Kate.
I love watching our heroes just continually try and gain the upper hand and fail every time. We get Han Solo, right off the bat, like you were saying, the Millennium Falcon's in rough shape. It's not dealing with the cold very well. It's got broken parts. He's trying to fix it with Chewie. And I think one of my favorite things about The Empire Strikes Back is the relationship between Han and Chewie, where they're constantly yelling at each other. No, don't fix that one. Fix this one. What are you doing? I just took that thing apart. Now you're putting it all back together. I love that banter. And it was between not only Han and Chewie, but also between Han and Leia, which is such a cool little a way of building a romance between two
I
people
love
who
he's negging her the whole movie. And he's like, your worship.
such a snarky
And then by the
prick.
time she tells him, I love you, he's just like, I know.
Scruffy looking nerf herder.
Herder, man.
Scruffy looking.
The relationship between all the characters in this movie are just freaking on point. I love it. Every little bit of it it just feels so good to be with our heroes again. But then at the same time to watch them just be like, oh crap, what's gonna happen now? Oh crap, they got to get out of this situation. Like through the entire movie, they're in a pinch, and I just
they're always at a disadvantage.
yeah, they're always on their heels. They're always at a disadvantage. They're always trying to get to the next step and ultimately failing. I don't know what it is, man, but this movie gets me.
There was so much cool stuff introduced in this movie. Yoda was introduced in this movie. Lando was introduced in this movie.
I mean, he's all right.
It's the most charming man in the galaxy.
So much
Got
of
a whole
our
city full of clouds.
so much of our Star Wars lore came out of this movie. It was good stuff.
Frank Oz just nailing it.
I really love the alien puppets. Like there's just something about the aliens being puppets in Star Wars that made them feel more real than the CGI version.
It was a weird offshoot of like the old 70s, like Labyrinth with, what was that, David Bowie?
I said it felt like very like Fraggle Rock.
Yeah.
What are we talking about?
The puppets. That,
Yoda?
Yeah. Okay. Like Yoda, but other aliens as well. One of the things I really like about like a show like Farscape is they did the whole puppets as aliens thing. And I guess it might just be my own personal taste, but like I really enjoy that aspect of it.
There's
like,
something nostalgic
like the guys in suits and then like the weird puppets and like Jabba being a puppet and stuff like that. There's just something about it that makes it feel more real than when they're just completely CGI.
And that's
Because they are real.
Yeah. But it's kind of a tough sell though, because honestly, when I watched like Labyrinth and some of those older movies from the 70s that have puppetry and stuff like that, and what was it, The Dark Crystal or whatever, I don't like it. It doesn't get me. I'm like, no, that's clearly a puppet, but something about the way
I have never, ever in my life looked at Yoda, the original Yoda, and my brain thinks puppet.
yeah.
Yeah.
When I think of puppets, I think of the Muppets. I think of Kermit and Miss Piggy, but I've never thought, like, I never picture Frank Oz's hand up Yoda's butt, moving his arms and face around. I never, ever think that.
There's something magical about this that makes Yoda a real character.
I think a lot of it has to do with the environment that he's in,
Yeah.
because he's already in such an alien environment, and he looks like he fits in because he looks like a frog, and they're in a swamp. So he's already kind of like a part of this world that they created on Dagobah, and it sells it 100%. And it's one of the reasons why I don't think Puppet Yoda worked in the prequels, because Puppet Yoda in the prequels was like, what is that thing? It's clearly a puppet, because he was in like a stark, like, real environment with like walls and flooring and cushions and this and that. But when you put him in the swamp, it just kind of, I don't know, man. The only puppet that's ever worked for me on screen is Yoda. Like, you take a puppet in any other movie, I'm like, nah, that's a puppet, bro. But Yoda, it's like, no, that's Yoda. That's Jedi freaking Master Yoda.
But we actually get to see Luke train to be a Jedi.
Yeah.
And we get the sense that he's been experimenting with force powers when he, at the beginning when
he can barely get a lightsaber out of the snow.
Yeah, but you get a sense that he's been trying to like learn this himself, and then we finally get to see like him train with like a Jedi Master, and so like his ability to like jump out of that carbonite freezing chamber at the last second, stuff like that. It's all justified by the time you get there.
Yeah.
And this is simple setup payoff.
It's very important to a hero's journey to make sure that you set up the abilities that they have from the beginning and watch them learn how to use them. That's the most important.
They're not just
thing.
given to them by the story.
I think, so I have a really, really good friend of mine that I work with, and he doesn't like this movie, and he's a huge Star Wars nerd, and me and him will go back and forth with movie lines, and we'll throw quotes back and forth at each other, but like, he's like, no, man, I just thought the whole Dagobah thing was boring. And I'm like, what? Like, I don't know what it is about me, but when I watch Dagobah, even though it's like a kind of a low point as far as the action goes in this movie, to me,
cave scene,
it's the most enthralling part of this movie is watching Luke discover the fact that this is a Jedi Master. And he's like, no, Ben, tell him I'm ready. And he's like, I want to train as a Jedi. And then you get these lessons from Yoda that are so on point. Like, is the dark side stronger? No. just quicker and easier and whatever, whatever the line he
more
said,
seductive.
more seductive. And I'm like, man, this is
But it's funny because like the middle of
some knowledge.
the middle of this movie, so you have two main storylines that kind of diverge at the end of the first act, where you have Han and Leia being pursued by the Empire, and then you have Luke who's off on Dagobah on his own, and yet Vader is a persistent threat in both storylines. If you look at that scene where Luke goes into the cave to confront whatever's in there, and Yoda kind of tells him like, you won't need your weapon, and Luke's just kind of like, oh, I'm taking my weapon, and then he goes in there and he has a showdown with Vader, but then the symbolism of like him cutting off Vader's head, and then like within the mask it's actually Luke, and that kind of setting up the whole like temptation of like what the dark side actually is and how it gets a hold of you.
So deep.
Yeah, I mean like it's so well set up. Especially like when we get to the third movie and he's confronting Palpatine, and it's not an issue of like, oh, you got to kill this guy. It's like, if you kill him, you're giving in to the dark side and doing exactly what he wants. And that cave scene kind of perfectly encapsulated the struggle that he was going to be facing, not only at the climax of this movie, but in the next movie as well. And it was just very well done.
Little nerd trivia question, but did you guys know that they actually had a fake Mark Hamill head set up and created to be inside the Vader mask, but then when they shot the video of it, it looked terrible. So what they did instead was they got Mark Hamill to stick his head through a hole and put the helmet around him and then shot it again.
His face already kind of looks terrible throughout the movie.
It's terrible, Jude.
I do have a comment for what your coworker was saying about that whole part of the movie that seemed boring to him. I feel like there's something to be said for when Luke kind of he lands and he meets Yoda and he doesn't know who Yoda is yet. I think that there's something very petulant about him, that he's like, I don't have time for this annoying alien. I'm basically a Jedi anyway. And there's just something so immature and petulant about his character at that point. So maybe that's what your coworker wasn't liking about that whole like part of the movie, was just like that Luke is basically an asshole to this Jedi master until the second he found out who Yoda was. And then he was all of a sudden like, no, I mean, I'll do whatever you say. Yeah. And then all of a sudden he wasn't a jerk to Yoda.
Yeah. That was what, test number 1 that he failed or whatever. You're like,
failed that test.
Yeah.
Luke just keeps failing his test left and right.
Yeah. Which I'm going to bring this up. We might as well bring it up now because there's no real structure to this podcast. But I wanted to ask you guys, like this idea that's like floating around the internet nowadays, is that like Luke's constant failure is a way of justifying his failure later on in life. But I'm watching this movie and I'm seeing him fail time after time. Do you guys think that him leaving Dagobah to go and save Han and Leia was actually a failure, or was that more of, I'm going to ask you first because you haven't talked in a while, but
good.
Is it
I don't have an answer.
You don't?
Yes, I really don't know.
Give me that microphone.
I really don't know.
Do you feel like that was a failure, or do you think that was the right thing to do? Him leaving and going to Bespin?
I don't know. I don't know.
Jude?
I think that there is no right or wrong answer to that. I don't think that it was a mistake, because ultimately what happened was supposed to happen. But I don't think that it was what Yoda or Ben or Obi-Wan, whatever. I don't think it's what they wanted for him, but it's the path that Luke chose for himself. But ultimately he chose the right path anyway, so.
Kadish, what do you think?
Well, it goes to the crux of the character of Luke, where basically he places the lives of his friends and family above anything else, and he's willing to sacrifice everything for their sake, and himself. He's part of everything. So,
I mean, except for his aunt and uncle.
Well, I mean, like, I'm sure, like, if he was there when they were being attacked, he would have done everything he could to save them. But I mean, it goes to the fundamental aspect of the character of Luke, is that he embodies hope. He is the new hope in episode 4. And this idea that he's unable, like Obi-Wan and Yoda both want him to complete his training at the expense of his friends' lives. and he's unwilling to make that sacrifice. But that's also because of that moral center of his, where he's just loyal to a fault to the people that he cares about. That's also the thing that ultimately redeems Vader, because Luke is the one person in the universe who never gave up on him, who was willing to go the distance and sacrifice his own life in order to save the life of this father that he never knew. And that is the crux of what makes Luke Skywalker a true hero, is that he's willing to do the hard thing when everyone else is unwilling to do that. And this idea that, you're talking about later on in the sequels, and I'm sure we'll talk about this next week, that he basically loses that as he gets older and becomes this fallen hero, this hermit who basically forsakes his own family and his duty and his responsibility to the galaxy. That's so out of character from the Luke that we see in these three movies that it literally ruins it for everyone who's a fan of that character.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point I was trying to get to. Is like this movie is the reason why we fall in love with Luke, and Yoda and Obi-Wan have essentially given up on Anakin or Vader as a being redeemed. Like, no, we're training you to go and kill him and stop him. Like, that's their whole point and mission is to raise Luke, make him a Jedi, and have him face Vader and kill him and Palpatine to destroy the Sith. But Luke is like, no, there's another way, and I'm gonna. They didn't believe it, even in the Return of the Jedi, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But they were like, no, the Emperor's already won if you're not willing to kill your father.
Yeah, and if you look at it from a structural point of view, this segment of Luke's journey where he is failing, this is in the hero's journey in the greater scheme of things, this falls into the whole test allies and enemies, approaching the innermost cave and having the ordeal. Those are like the three parts, the three phases of this hero's journey based off of the structure that Lucas was following. And so it's not that he's failing, it's that he's meeting these obstacles that are teaching him what he has to do in order to progress as a character. And that's the real difference here is that, this is a part of this journey that Luke is on, where he has to go through these failures in order to come out stronger on the other side. And I think a lot of people who make the argument against that kind of miss the point of all this stuff.
Yeah.
But there are two parts of this movie I want to talk to you guys about before we get moving on.
I'll talk about anything Empire Strikes Back. Go ahead.
So the first thing is one of the most iconic parts of this movie, in my opinion, is that scene where Han Solo is getting frozen in carbonite and he's being lowered down in there, and he has that exchange with Leia where she finally admits, "I love you," and that's like the culmination of her arc.
Yeah,
where she allows herself to be vulnerable and actually admit her feelings for this guy. And you can even see glimpses of this in A New Hope, where she's looking at Han as he charges off after the stormtroopers, and she's
came in that thing. You're braver than I thought.
But no, this is after that where she's.
I know, but it's still a lie.
But the look on her face when he does that, you can tell she's
what a
turned
man.
on.
What
Exactly.
Yeah. Look at him and his hot rod.
Yeah. And that scene, as he gets frozen in carbonite and the music swells and the mist is coming up around Vader's helmet.
Oh,
and
what a scene. And
you just get this, and Chewbacca's screaming because he's seeing his friend get frozen like that, and everything about that scene just it's almost celebrating the victory of the bad guys. And it's just so emotional and poignant. And I want to know what you guys felt when you first saw that scene.
I'll let you guys. I got goosebumps, so I'll let you guys go first. Go ahead, Vader. Do you remember that scene? What is it about?
Well, yeah, I remember
the carbon freezing scene.
What did I feel?
Yeah, what do you feel when you watch that?
I feel like Kadish set it up so much that no matter what we say, it's all just going to be black.
I felt.
You might be right.
I had feelings and I felt them.
I felt like it probably hurts to get frozen in carbonite.
Jude,
you guys put so much stuff into these things. All
What
these
do you mean?
thoughts
What
and
did we
processes, and write all these books and novels. It's
it must suck to get frozen.
yeah, it probably sucks to get frozen. So I don't know, whatever.
Jude, how did you feel about that?
You know what? Just to tack on what Vader said, it looks like
Why
it
are
hurts.
you having a southern accent?
God damn, she went South County there.
Yeah, she did. I feels good.
I had feelings and I felt them. Now you go.
That's it? Okay. Well, all right,
No,
Kadish, I'll be on your level.
Yeah, I don't know. You set it up so much.
Yes, give us
It's
10
just
minutes of how you felt.
Yeah, man,
when
that
Han
was
Solo went into
awesome.
That is
Carbonite.
it's the lowest of the low. It's
Yeah.
like your heroes are out of the game. Like you're done. You lost. Congratulations. Welcome to the Empire.
And yet
Here's
it's
your
not
cell.
over.
And yet it's not over. But they still lose anyway.
No, that's what I mean. Like it's a pretty low point.
Yeah, which
and
is
yet
the part of
there's
this-
still more load to come because he's like, I'm going after Luke now.
Yeah, and it's kind of the whole job of this sequel to bring your heroes to their lowest point, so that when they rise from that in the third story, it's an even more triumphant victory.
And this, like, from Vader's perspective, this wasn't even like his like.
Vader or the real Vader?
No. From
he
Darth
was doing-
Vader's perspective, it wasn't even like, this is what I'm going to do to you. It was just like, this is a practice
Yeah.
for what I'm really going to do to Luke. So let's just make sure it works and it doesn't kill him. So if it's going to kill him, I'd rather kill this guy.
Yeah.
You know,
He's
And
expendable.
yeah, he was expendable. So
You were gonna say something?
sorry.
Okay.
No.
I love this scene. I think it's the ultimate bad guy like montage where you have like Boba Fett there, and you've got the steam and the orange coloring with the blue, which is like scientifically
the cinematography.
Yeah, the
That's
cinematography in this episode is
the
freaking
set design.
Yeah, I mean the blue and orange is like scientifically studied to make humans react in a certain
and you
way.
know, going back to Kurosawa, so like if you look at the Hidden Fortress, he uses fog in that movie like a master. Like it's such a integral part of certain scenes. The way Kurosawa always uses some type of weather in his movies, and Irvin Kershner, the guy who directed Empire Strikes Back, in this scene he uses the steam and the fog. In much the same way that Kurosawa employs it in the Hidden Fortress. It's so
good.
masterfully done.
So good.
Yeah.
That scene where the steam rises up and you just see Vader's helmet and you got the music and the sound of all the machinery and stuff. You're like, dang, man. Like it hits on all cylinders on that that point.
And that setting is actually the part of the second thing I wanted to talk about, which was Luke's confrontation with Vader. This is the first time that Luke and Vader meet face to face. And when George Lucas saw the first cut of Empire, and he watched this scene, and Vader is fighting Luke one-handed. He lost his stuff because, you know, he's like, they're supposed to be like
Excalibur,
like samurai.
heavy. Yeah.
They're supposed to always fight with two hands. And Kershner was like, well, we had a plan for this. And it's really interesting if you watch the fight between Luke and Vader, because at first Vader kind of underestimates Luke, and he's fighting him one-handed because he's toying with him. He's kind of like testing to see like how much he's learned. And then once Luke starts like kind of like manhandling him, like kicking him off like platforms and stuff, Vader's not having any of it.
No, he gets pissed.
And so like when he comes back, he just starts like messing Luke up. And so like there's this kind of like progression of the showdown where, you know, at first it's all like, you know, like I'm just trying to get you into this freezing chamber and it's all too easy. And then like, oh, impressive. And then he's like, oh, I got kicked off the platform. And so now
I feel like that was almost part of his plan.
No, I think that Luke actually kind of surprised him. And that's why in the next scene, when he runs into him in that hallway,
Not taking any prisoners.
oh no, he's messing him up.
You know what I thought was interesting too? This is like a super deep cut, but during that very scene, like right after he gets kicked off the ledge, Luke goes down this little labyrinth of tunnels and he finds his way into this hallway and next to the big window. You don't hear anything, which is weird because Vader's got this very iconic breathing and you can always hear it. And that's how you know he's coming. That's how, like in Rogue One, you heard the breathing before you saw the lightsaber type of thing, but you don't hear anything until you see the lightsaber come down. And then all of a sudden you hear Vader like he was holding his breath. He was holding his breath so he wouldn't give away his position. I love that stuff,
Using
man.
the Force. Force breath.
I mean, like Vader throughout this entire movie is such a force to be reckoned with. Like he doesn't suffer fools easily. Like he literally, now that Tarkin's not around to rein him in, he like just starts killing the people who, you know, fail to do their job to his satisfaction.
Yeah.
But also like he's doing things like, you know, like I've altered the deal, pray I don't alter it again. And like he's just like, he takes control of every situation that he's in. And in this final fight with Luke, you know, he's like when Luke kind of gets tossed out of that window and he like climbs back up on the scaffold and he's trying to find his way back inside Cloud City, and Vader surprises him and just starts like you know, just going ham on
Putting the hammer down on that
with his lightsaber.
Walls and stuff.
Yeah, but he's like, you know, just like Luke is just completely outmatched by his saber skills, and then he loses his hand. And at that point, now that Vader's kind of like has him at his mercy, at that point, that's when Vader's like, okay, now you're going to come with me. And even after Luke chooses to throw himself to his death as opposed to like join Vader, Vader is still trying to like track him down and capture him, you know, at the end there.
Oh yeah.
Because like he still, you know, Vader is just so like relentless and obsessed with, you know, achieving this goal. And the whole like reveal that Vader is Luke's father.
God, you're just blowing through this whole movie, dude.
Well, I mean, like that's part of the scene, and that was like, you know, I can't remember, you know, I wasn't in the theater when that bomb was dropped, but you know, can you imagine being in the theater and having that moment come up and everyone being like, "What the?" You know?
That's exactly what it was.
Were you in the theater when you saw it?
yeah.
Okay, please recount the.
Well, it was just like he just saw. I mean, it was a long time ago.
I know.
But I just remember everybody being completely surprised. It's like, he's what? Darth Vader's Luke's dad? No, he's lying. It can't be
Search
true.
your feelings.
People thought he was lying.
Yeah, but then, you know, you kind of think back to the swamp scene where Luke's in the helmet and all that kind of stuff, and he kind of tie it together. And it's like, oh, yeah, okay, maybe he isn't lying. And yeah, it was a shock. It was definitely one of those classic moments, one of those big WTF moments in the movie theater, and everybody's like, whoa. It was wild.
I'm so jealous of people.
Didn't
who were
they
there.
keep that a secret in the script also
Yes.
until
Oh, yeah.
the last minute?
Oh yeah. Nobody knew except for George Lucas. I think David Prowse knew, but that was because he spoke German. Lucas knew, and James Earl Jones knew because James Earl Jones got a different type of script. And I think one of the stories that Mark Hamill always talks about is like, I was in the theater, I was sitting next to Harrison Ford, and Harrison goes, "You didn't tell me that, kid." He's like, I wasn't supposed to tell you.
This was long before the
internet.
The internet days. And everything got
WikiLeaks
ruined.
and all this other nonsense.
You want to know why I think this movie turned out so good?
It's because George Lucas had the A team, director Kushner. He had the A team of the writers with Kasdan, and then he had the world building of George Lucas, the cinematography, the Phil Tippett who did the AT-AT. I mean, this is like,
Yeah, like 3 different dudes playing Vader.
dude, he did too.
I was gonna say, I think the reason this turned out so good is like this is the one Star Wars movie, the original trilogy, that George Lucas had the least involvement in.
Ouch. Shots fired. It's his
No,
birthday, dude.
It's very true.
It is true, though.
It's a birthday roast.
The real people behind this movie, it came down to 3 people. It was Lawrence Kasdan, who was the screenwriter.
Mm-hmm.
It was Irving Kershner, who was the director, and he was also George Lucas's former film professor at USC. And it was Gary Kurtz, the producer. And Gary Kurtz was really kind of like the driving factor in both A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, because he was the one who really wanted to put the characters kind of at the forefront and have it be about like their relationships and their struggles, as opposed to like the big overarching kind of like blockbuster plot that was Lucas's strong suit. And throughout the course of making this movie, Kushner and Kurtz went over budget. They went over, over schedule. And because of these budget overruns, because initially Star Wars was actually being financed by Lucas, and he had to go to Fox to get money to finish the film, and Fox demanded that he give up part of his, merchandising rights in order to, justify the cost of, these overruns. And it was because Lucas had to give up that sizable chunk of money that he ended up firing Kurtz and Kushner for the 3rd film, and bring on a whole new creative team for that.
Bad move, man. Should have kept him. This movie is just so damn perfect.
It is. I was telling Matt earlier.
You just settle down.
Well, I was telling Matt earlier. Like I was so shocked at how elegant and well done these movies are, even 30 years after they've been made. Especially in comparison to like the sequels that we've gotten from Disney. Like there's just no comparison. Like, Matt was talking earlier about how that scene where Vader kneels down to a holographic version of Palpatine. There's that exact same scene in The Force Awakens where they're in front of a holographic version of Snoke. Yeah. And it doesn't carry any of that same weight or like, just being like, oh wow, that's our first look at the Emperor.
Too soon. It was too soon.
Why is Snoke so big?
Oh, you remember the theory that he was like some kind of a giant?
He's a
or something like
giant.
that? Yeah, I remember all that.
The Emperor's head was 20 feet wide in the Empire, so why couldn't Snoke be big?
Yeah.
But this whole trilogy, but this movie in particular, is really the heart of what Star Wars is to me, which is these underdogs who are just constantly overcoming impossible obstacles at great personal sacrifice, and that's the message of any good war movie, really.
Yeah.
Is the ability for heroes to sacrifice themselves for the greater good, and nothing encapsulates that more than Empire Strikes Back, in my opinion.
I 100% agree with you. Real quick, going around the table, favorite scene, Jude. Favorite scene from Empire Strikes Back.
Come back to me.
Matt Vader, favorite scene from Empire Strikes Back. Don't say come back to me.
Just like cater's talk for both of us.
No, shut up, you guys. Come on.
There's so many.
Favorite. What
Probably the dad reveal.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Has to be the dad reveal. It's like, I'm your father. It's like, okay, that was like we said.
Yeah.
That blew the theater up. So I'll go with that.
God, I'm so jealous.
I guess mine's probably the training in the swamp.
With Yoda?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
It's really an important part of
That scene where Yoda lifts the X-wing out of the water.
That's pretty sweet.
The music
Proves
is so
size
amazing.
matters not.
Yeah. Luminous
does.
beings are
Yeah.
we? Not this crude matter. God, there's so many good lines.
I always liked how they went into the Force in this movie.
Oh yeah.
We didn't have to have it explained to us with midi-chlorians and that kind of nonsense.
I think it was explained perfectly. in
I
this
did
movie.
too. That's why I
don't-
was so upset with the.
I don't
new
really
stuff.
believe there needs to be any more explanation than what's in Empire. I feel like it's perfect the way it is. My favorite scene, I'll just go real quick. It's got to be when Luke walks up the staircase towards Vader and he pulls out his lightsaber and ignites his lightsaber in front of Vader, and then they cross blades for the first time. Like that. Gosh, just thinking about it, man, gets me amped. Like just watching it, like, yes, I'm rooting for Luke, but I know he's going to fail every time. But I'm like, yes, he's got it this time. He's got it this time.
And that image of like Vader's silhouette against the blue background.
Dude, gosh. If any movie is going to get me into like filmmaking and cinematography and lighting and all that stuff, it's going to be this one. Like
So
if I
beautifully
ever-
shot.
Well, they don't do it that way anymore.
I know, it's all CGI.
It's all done on a computer now.
Anyway, Kadish, what's your absolute favorite scene from this movie?
I really like the "I love you, I know" scene where Han Solo is getting frozen in carbonite.
Romantic at heart.
There's just so much emotional weight to that scene, and it's something that it's so iconic and it's so tragic at the same time and so heartbreaking. But it's the most true emotional moment in the entire series, I think.
And
Now-
you said when we were watching this that you thought that Harrison Ford had ad-libbed.
He did.
He did, yeah.
He did ad-lib that.
Yep.
They froze him, right? Because they didn't know if he was going to come back for the third
Exactly.
movie.
Yeah, I think was it Kasdan and Harrison both wanted to kill off
It was Gary Kurtz.
Gary Kurtz? Okay.
Yeah.
So I know Harrison Ford wanted to also because he
Yeah.
talks about that all the time. He was like, I told George just to kill my character off to make it like, because I didn't want to come back for the third one or
What a
whatever.
jerk.
But George, well, this is a testament to George too, because I know we kind of rag on him a little bit for some of his ideas and stuff. But like one of the things about George is like, no, I want these movies to be hopeful. I want these movies to be give people a good feeling at the end of the day. And
Yeah.
to kill off one, I'm never going. He's like, I'm not going to kill off
Gary
any of the main
Kurtz's
characters.
vision for how the saga should have ended was a bit of a downer.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like Luke Skywalker. He wins, but at the same time he kind of loses. Han Solo dies.
Yeah.
Leia goes on to like lead the New Republic, but she's all alone. Like there was like this bittersweet ending planned, and I'm kind of glad that George kind of stepped in and said like, no, we're not going to do that. But then Disney comes in and ruins everything. So
You can't help but mention it, can you?
yeah.
I'm. This is the one at a time that I'm going to be on George's side 100%. Like I feel like that hopeful ending and not killing off any of your main characters was a big positive point for this trilogy. I think I'm glad he stuck with his guns on that. Although I am glad that he gave the reins over to some more capable people when it came to directing and writing some of these movies because they're so freaking good.
George Lucas is the rebellion and Disney is the empire.